The Dragon Race, aka the Dragon Tribe or Dragon Folk, is one of the 6 main races of the Mushoku Tensei world, and is an example of the popular last-of-his-kind archetype. In the era where the series takes place, there are nearly no dragon race remaining, but the few who do and the impact of the ones who don't shape both the world and the story. In this video, I'll explain the dragon race's history, traits, abilities, and culture, including a list of the current members and what happened to the rest. There will be spoilers later in this video for the Mushoku Tensei prequel Old Dragon's Tale, and major story beats of Mushoku Tensei like the origin of Orsted's conflict with the man god. So if you haven't completed the novels and the prequel, I highly suggest you click away when I give a warning. A piece of skipped content in the anime is when Rudius reads a world history book. This book is the official history that gets some things wrong and is missing key details, but since it's spoiler free, I'll base the next part here on that, and then I'll pivot to the actual history in the spoiler section. So for those who have never read Volume 2, there should be a link to my video reading the world history section up in the corner, so check that out. Anyway, here's the summary. A long time ago, the world of Mushoku Tensei was composed of 6 separate worlds, all conjoined together like the faces of a cube. These worlds were connected not so much physically as it was magical. They were on the same plane of existence, but you need the power of a god and a shrine to pass in between each. Each world was home to one of the 6 races, that being humans, demons, sea race, heaven race, beast race, and dragon race. An important distinction is that the world where the series takes place is the human world, because all the others have long since been destroyed. The dragon world, as you expect a fantasy world by that name to resemble, was an endless dragon-infested mountain range, but with a unique quirk. The terrain was above and the sky was below. Gravity pulled down towards the sky, where supposedly a great serpent lived that ate whatever was unfortunate enough to fall in. The sky was blue and filled with clouds, and it was also implied to be starless. How did rain work, and where did the dragons get their water? Your guess is as good as mine. The dragon race that inhabited this world was originally weak, and hid from the dragons on hillsides and caves. But this changed when the dragon god arrived. He taught the dragon race how to draw on the power of dragon battle aura. With this power, the dragon race became the apex predator of their world. The dragon god and the other gods from the 5 other worlds had the power to cross the boundary, and through the exchange of knowledge and meetings between the other races, the dragon race learned the benefits of civilization from humans. They began to hollow out the insides of mountains to build cities. By the time of the events of Old Dragon's Tale roll around, the dragon world has become a thriving civilization. Much later, the dragon god and his generals would eventually go on to destroy 4 of the worlds, with some of the inhabitants from each escaping to the human world. At this point, the generals turned on the dragon god, and this culminated in the destruction of the dragon world, which very few dragon race members managed to escape. The dragon race struggled onwards for another 10,000 years, building structures in the most out-of-the-way places possible to record their goals and what they've learned, as well as teleportation circles to move safely around the world, but by Rudius' era, they are mostly extinct. The dragon race are tall, silver, winged, and scaly humanoid creatures, basically a mashup of a human and a dragon. The silver scales covering their bodies come in varying hues. They also have silver hair and golden eyes that resemble a snake's, which are described as sanpaku, meaning sclera is visible around the iris. They tend to be quite a bit taller than humans, with the main character of Old Dragon's Tale being over 2 meters tall. Members of the dragon race could live for tens of thousands of years, a period so long that their perception of time was unlike the other races. Due to their long lifespan, the dragon race only had children once every 1,000 years, with pregnancy lasting 50 years and the resulting egg needing 50 more years to hatch. Similar to their life expectancy, there is no direct number given to how long it took for a dragon race to mature. But due to the extremely long gestation period, I assume it would take several hundred years at the very least. Toki, fighting spirit, or battle aura, is a technique used by most fighters in the Mushoku Tensei world, where part or all of the user's body is coated in mana, which amplifies the user's physical abilities, allowing them to run faster, hit harder, and take less damage. Whenever you see a human perform an impossible feat, you can usually chalk this up to battle aura. Dragon battle aura is a much more powerful version of this, allowing the user to harden their skin, move at incredible speeds, and fly by pumping it into their wings. There's an even higher tier version of this called Saint Dragon Battle Aura, which was invented by dragon god Urapin, and used by Orsted, which is more mana efficient and far more difficult to cut through and damage the user. So when Rudius wounds Orsted's hand, this is a far greater feat than it comes off as. The aforementioned flying wasn't performed by flapping like a bird. Instead, Dragon Race would pour Dragon Battle Aura into their wings, which generated a force field of sorts, which propelled them into the air, and once aloft, they could use their wings to glide. The combat style of the Dragon Race is rather simple. By pouring Dragon Battle Aura into their wings, they could flank enemies extremely quickly. This was called the Wing Technique. Coding fists in Dragon Battle Lore to break an enemy's defenses was called the Fang technique, and doing the same with an outstretched hand to stab or slash and finish enemies was called the Claw technique. In Orsted's fight with Ruijerd, we can get a good look at what the Claw and Fang techniques look like. Another ability of the Dragon race is their ability to fight in all mediums. As a team, the Dragon God and his generals single-handedly wiped out the Ocean World, Heaven World, and Beast World, meaning land and air combat pose no obstacle, but for some reason, neither does undersea combat, even though they didn't have anything like an ocean in their home world. Some other miscellaneous traits the Dragon race possessed are that they only need to sleep every few years, and they can see perfectly fine in complete darkness. Dragon race also have an incredibly strong memory. When first arriving in the Dragon world, Old Dragon's Tale's main character managed to remember all the sounds of the words people spoke to him, while not knowing what any of it meant until 2 years later when he became fluent in the language. A Dragon race's memory is nearly limitless. They can recall events in extreme detail, thousands of years after the fact. There wasn't a family structure among the Dragon race. The children were raised in nurseries and eventually assigned a teacher who would train them one-on-one, until it came time for the children to begin learning how to fly. Manipulation of battle aura is not something that could be taught, as it is intrinsic, so children would be sent to a platform where each day they would leap off and try to trigger flight. Over the course of a full century, the children would either figure out how to fly, or they would give up. Those who failed would be dubbed faller, and live as outcasts, forced to work jobs no one else wanted, the lowest rung of the Dragon caste system. I know it's abrupt, but this is as far as I can go without wading into spoiler territory, so this is your chance to click off if you're an anime only. So continuing onwards with culture, the Dragon race is a single-purposed oriented race. In the past, they dedicated their lives to the Dragon God, and their occupation, reproduction, and everything else they did in life led directly back to the Dragon God. For example, when he first arrived, the Dragon race instinctually feared and disliked Laplace due to being a half-demon and having frightening green hair, but rarely showed it due to his association as the adopted son of the Dragon God. After the fall of the Dragon world, all remaining Dragon race were hell-bent on working towards the defeat of the Man God. Laplace even forsakes helping his few surviving brethren to focus all his energy on the fight and preparing for Orsted's arrival. The only example of a Dragon race working their whole life for a different goal is Perugius. Possibly due to never meeting the original Dragon God, his main reason for living is to kill Laplace out of vengeance for his friends. And since Urupin never met the Dragon God, I can assume he had something else driving him too. Something I skipped over in the appearance section was mixed-race dragons. Mixed-race dragons tended to have streak combinations of silver and whatever hair color was inherited from their other side. For example, Laplace being half-demon had a mix of silver and green, while Dragon God Urupin being half-human had a mix of silver and blonde. Also, neither of them had scales. Now that begs the question, besides Orsted's facial scales, why don't Orsted or Perugius have the aforementioned full body scales and wings? Well, there are a few possible reasons. My first thought goes to Old Dragon's Tale being written several years after Riffigen introduced the Dragon race characters, so it's possible that he only came up with the idea for full body scales and wings after finishing the main story. Well, let's try to explain this within the lore. Firstly, both Orsted and Perugius reach the era where the series takes place via the Dragon race's Reincarnation technique. This technique entails sending your soul into the future and a factor being released into a population. A factor is basically the genes of the person who is using the technique. Over successive generations, those who have the factor will produce children a little more altered than they were. After enough time, this results in a child who is a match for the soul. This is when reincarnation is triggered and the dragon's soul takes over the child's body. Now the theory here is that because the body created in this technique is not perfectly the same as a dragon race's, this is why neither Orsted nor Perugius have the wings and scales that the other dragon races do. Now what's the counter to this? Well, firstly, Orsted is only half dragon, being 1/4 human and 1/4 human god. In Old Dragon's Tale when he was born, he is described as having considerably fewer scales than the average, and the subject of having wings is never mentioned, so he seems to fit the bill. However, a counter to this is that we've seen Orsted shirtless, and the guy has no scales anywhere on his torso. But if he had wings, would he spend all that time walking everywhere and needing to teleport? Now for Perugius. When he was born in Old Dragon's Tale, he was described as having sparse scales, but also has wings. The problem is that none of Perugius' skin is ever shown, besides his face, and even then, I can't find any examples that show the same spot on his face where Orsted has scales. Here is the only time he's been shown in the anime thus far, and if I lighten it up, no scales. As for wings, in Light Novel Volume 23, Perugius had to climb the cliff of the Heaven continent to learn a special technique to defeat Laplace. If this was the case and he needed to get up there quick, he would have used his wings if he had any, right? though maybe it makes sense to add the fact that it takes 100 years to learn how to fly, and maybe he never knew it was possible. I could go back and forth on this in circles, so I guess it's up to the reader. But I will add that Perugius looks a great deal more human than Orsted in the light novel illustrations, so I'm going to have to back with the side of the reincarnation theory. Where is the dragon race? Let's do a head count of who we know. Orsted and Perugius, of course. But also Technique God, which is the dragon half of Laplace. Who knows if we'll ever get to see him though, since Orsted doesn't think he's very useful for the struggle against the man god. Throughout the main series, the few times the dragon generals are mentioned, like by Perugius in the Sky Castle, future Rudius in the diary, or Rudius after returning home from Charon, they are implied to have an unknown status, whereas officially they are still alive. The ones mentioned are Sillard, Chaos, and Maxwell, but we know Sillard died in Old Dragon's Tale, and Rudius at one point reads an incantation, which is a poem describing Sillard's death. Along with that, Laplace said he felt the presence of Chaos and Maxwell disappear in the dragon world, and he presumes they died. But this could have meant they used the reincarnation technique on themselves. A more likely case is that the modern constituents of Chaos and Maxwell are the descendants of the original dragon generals, and they are just carrying on the name of their ancestor. The latest incarnation of Chaos died decades ago, and Orsted definitely killed him since he already has his treasure component. The new Maxwell and Sillard statuses are also unknown, but Rudius reasons that they could have also been killed by Orsted already, and he just doesn't want to talk about it. Are there any other dragon race still around? Probably not, and here's why. Very few managed to survive the fall of the dragon world. Those that did were then faced with persecution by all the inhabitants of the human world due to their part in the destruction of the 4 other worlds, as well as all the chaos caused by the dragon god's battle with the man god. Many dragon race were likely killed by the constant attacks from the other races, but on top of that, according to Nana Hoshi and later Rudius, the man god sends apostles constantly. This leads me to believe that the surviving dragon races who were dedicated to the fight against the man god were also hounded by apostles throughout their lives. The dragon race's extremely long gestation periods and comparatively long maturation on top of that made any reproducing dragon race vulnerable and easy to pick off by apostles. So when did the dragon race die off then? Let's pick at the timeline of the dragon gods. Orsted once said, quote, "Human god has defeated dragon gods with weaker blood." And he sure has, because there were 100 of them. The first dragon god was a divine entity. This title was originally his as the all-powerful leader, as well as the literal god of the dragon tribe. After his death, however, the title was held by the next strongest member of the dragon race. The second dragon god was Laplace, and we have no mentions of any others besides Urupin, the dragon god during the Laplace War, and the 100th and current holder of the title, Orsted. So when did the other gods reign? I'm not sure which number dragon god Urupin was. The reason for this is that Perugius only became aware of Orsted within the past century, meaning Orsted probably didn't attain his title until around that time. Moreover, Urupin attained his title before the Laplace War, with people believing he was unworthy of it, having low mana and being comparatively weak to previous generations. Being a half-human in the Mushoku Tensei world amounts to the dilution of the abilities allotted for the other parent's race, and Dragon God Urupin was no exception to this rule. It is very telling about the state of the dragon tribe 400 years ago that the strongest among them, and carrier of the title that once meant the literal god of an entire world, was a comparatively weak half-human. However, he ended up making up for it and was ordained the smartest and strongest dragon god to that point, by creating Saint Dragon Battle Aura. So I think it's safe to assume that Urupin was the 99th dragon god, and the position was vacant until Orsted came around. Now, this is just my interpretation, and considering that just a few decades prior, a few dragon generals were still around, that this probably isn't true, but I have nothing else to go on to fill in that 300-year gap accurately. With Laplace, the second dragon god dying 4,200 years before Rudius, and Urupin dying 400 years before Rudius, that means 97 dragon gods reigned between the two over the course of 3,800 years. If we do the math, each dragon god reigned for roughly 39 years, which for the dragon race that lives for tens of thousands of years, this is a very rapid turnover rate. That is all the information I have to offer. This video took a long time to research, write, and edit, and the amount of people asking the same questions I did online was pretty minimal. I'd also like to add that I started writing this script back in January, and I had not seen Natalie's video, which has garnered some traction. Now, it didn't take me 9 months to make this video, I am just very bad at time management. But if you could do me a huge favor and hit the like button, comment something, and subscribe, I would greatly appreciate it. Also, comment if you think I missed something or got something wrong, I will be more than happy to boost it.